No one is talking about this. As now, as the Toronto Maple Leafs have played 7 games into this season, we have seen a complete transformation of the way the team plays, and more specifically, the blue line, with additions like Chris Tanev pairing alongside Morgan Rielly. They had some very interesting things to say about playing with each other and how this could impact the rest of the season going forward. So stay tuned for all that in this episode. But before we get into it, quick reminder to hit the subscribe button. We're on the road to 14,000 subscribers. And thank you guys for your support in the streams we've been doing. It means the world. We will be live after tomorrow night's game as well. But Darius, a lot to go over today, and we're going to take a step back. Obviously, yesterday was a brutal game. They lost a pretty bad one against the Columbus Blue Jackets. But we're going to move on from that now. And as a whole, the season has looked very promising to start, and specifically the biggest change has been to the blue line. Obviously, they made additions like OEL and Chris Tanev, but the pairing of Morgan Rielly, and Chris Tanev has been way better than I could have even ever expected, and I feel like people aren't talking about that pairing enough. They're talking about Chris Tanev a little bit, they're talking about OEL a ton, and I'll get into OEL a little bit here as well, but the pairing of Morgan Rielly and Chris Tanev on that first line has looked really, really good, even though Morgan Rielly hasn't gotten off to the hottest start yet. He said, I feel like our games gel pretty well. Leafs defenseman Chris Tanev is excited about the potential defensive pairing with Morgan Rielly after the first couple of days of training camp. And that was, of course, before training camp started. And now, Darius, after they've played together for a little bit, now finally at the NHL level, it seems like they're kind of figuring out how each other play, and it's looking really good, especially defensively with Chris Tanev.
Yeah, and there's still some growing pains for the pairing too, but the fact that nobody's talking about them makes me believe that they're doing a good job so far this season, because I tend to believe, last year there was so much talk about Benoit, about how little we talk about him because he's been so good, right? So these little things every season, and I feel like that was TJ Brody a long time ago, a few years ago as well. People wouldn't really talk about him because he just came in, did his job very quietly and effectively, and that was that. So I think that Chris Tanev, is a great acquisition for this team, and he's been, doing it very quietly so far. And yes, they played 7 games, but realistically only 6 because last night was just horrible. But what we've seen so far is really good from Chris Tanev, and he's continuing to do the things that he was brought in to do. Block shots. He's one of the leaders in block shots last year in the entire National Hockey League. So continuing to do those things defensively, and he's moving the puck out very well. On the rush for the forwards, he's able to get it to them. He's an underrated puck moving defenseman too. And I think it hasn't happened yet because Morgan Rielly only has 2 points in the first 7 games this season. But I think he's there to unlock Morgan Rielly, where Morgan Rielly doesn't have to worry about his defensive partner anymore. He's able to do, what he does very effectively. And Morgan Rielly might be able to go off a little bit more offensively. We haven't seen it yet so far this season, but we're only 7 games in, and they're still getting used to Berube's system as well.
Yeah, and of course, Rielly is more of an offensive-minded defenseman to a degree, and now, of course, Chris Tanev is one of the best defensive defensemen in the NHL. And we saw this before the season started. I think we played together before, obviously not at the NHL level on a different stage, but I feel like our games gel pretty well. So good to be with him for the last 2 days. We'll see what happens going forward here. And of course, this was in training camp, and now that we've seen it, it has looked very good. And all of these things that are coming out of him being a great guy. I mean, Tanev has been one of the great signings from Brad Living this offseason, specifically to add to the blue line that desperately needed a complete overhaul, and OEL, of course, as well. But they now have one of the better blue lines in the NHL, and I wanted to touch on, just the Chris Tanev, what he's brung to this team, because a lot of people, and we have our streams, of course, we name the 3 stars every single game, aside from maybe yesterday's. Chris Tanev name is constantly brought up in these talks, revolving around the fact that, hey, you don't really notice him all that much, which is probably the best case scenario and the best advocate for Chris Tanev is not seeing him out there continually playing, horribly or anything like that, because he's just been amazing so far throughout the year, specifically on the defensive end. He's not going to get much going for you on the offensive end, but he's exceeded every expectation I've had for him so far. Again, only 7 games in, which isn't going to be anything crazy. OEL is getting all the spotlight here, so I just wanted to give Chris Tanev some love because OEL has been amazing as well. We can get into him in a minute, but Chris Tanev, you see him get hurt, he just comes right back out there. It's the way he is.
Yeah, in terms of the signings this offseason, the new guys, I mean, like Stolars, Lorentz, there's been so much made of them early in the season, even OEL, like you said, because I think he's playing a lot better than what people realize, but we kind of knew, like we were talking about it during the summer, you and I, and even on stream, where it's like, no, he's going to help them a lot. But Chris Tanev too, like nobody's really talking about him. There is some conversations about him, but really talking about what he's been able to bring to the team so far this year. And I mean, like I was at the game Saturday, right? He blocks a shot, a really hard shot on the power play, goes down, leaves the game, comes back. right? He comes back. So that's just the type of player he is. And that's exactly what the Leafs need moving forward. So he's been a great acquisition for the team so far. It's very early, right? He's only going to get better, I think, as the season goes on. Same with Morgan Rielly. I think he's a great complement piece for Morgan Rielly, and he makes the defensive core and the goaltending look that much better because there aren't as many scramble plays. So yes, Stolar has been great, but there aren't as many scramble plays so far in this young season. So Chris Tanev has been fantastic.
Yeah, you can see here, like you just mentioned, the the Chris Tanev experience you've seen so far. He skates directly to the locker room after blocking a shot right to the ankle. Doesn't appear to be back on the bench for the start of the third. Tanev is also back, and that's what you're going to get from Chris Tanev all the way through. But I think he also just elevates everybody else on the defensive core, whether that's in practice, whether that's in games. We've seen some things about Berube speaking about how good he was in practice a couple months ago when they first initially signed him at the start of the offseason. But now seeing it in action, again, we appreciated him his time in Calgary when he was on the trade block. The Leafs almost made multiple trades for defensemen, Nikita Zadorov, and of course Chris Tanev as well last trade deadline. It's kind of been like a dream for a while for Leafs to get Chris Tanev, but now that we actually get to see him play, I think it's fans need to appreciate it a little bit more. And you can see here again, he went straight to the locker room after his block shot, turns his body. He finished third in NHL blocks last year, and he's not a guy that's going to get on the stat sheet regarding goals, but there's some other quotes we have for you here, and this is from his brother, Brandon Tanev. He said, "It's exciting. It's one of those things that every kid growing up in Toronto dreams of. Now his dream becomes a reality. It's a great addition for them, and our family is extremely excited for him. When he told me I was so happy, it's a great moment for him. It's great to see him put on a Leafs jersey, being a hometown boy." So ultimately, it's great. He loves the city. The city definitely loves him, and he's been playing very well and has helped elevate this team. And again, some people are probably down on them right now because the Leafs are coming off of the worst loss that we've seen in a pretty long time, at the very least this season. We'll go with it this season. But I have all the confidence in the world in the blue line of the team bouncing back in tomorrow night's game. But giving Chris Tanev, giving him some love is pretty important here because, again, OEL has been stealing at least all the media spotlight. I'm sure a lot of fans out there are noticing Chris Tanev. We've seen some love in our streams as well, but OEL has been stealing a lot of the spotlight, which, to his credit, he definitely deserves.
Yeah, and I think, with OEL, like I said, like I don't think enough people realized what he was going to be able to bring to the team after last year. And with Chris Tanev, I think people were educated on him and knew exactly what he was going to bring, and he's doing exactly that. So there's less talk about him. But one thing I've noticed on the streams, our streams specifically after games, is we'll talk about who are your 3 stars, right? And we'll give it out to the chat, and we'll give our 3 stars of each game. And a lot of the time it's the goal scorers or people who made a difference, maybe somebody who fought, right? But then everyone's like, oh yeah, an honorable mention, Chris Tanev, because he was actually brilliant tonight, but he didn't score, right? So like you said, like he's not going to jump out at you on the stat sheet. He might not even score a goal this year, right? And that's fine. But he's going to do all the other things that the Leafs haven't been doing the last couple of years, like, the blocking the shots, the ugly things, the ugly part of the game, the physical part of the game. And like I said, he's an underrated puck mover. He's getting the puck out efficiently to to the tapes, so the forwards can start doing stuff with that in the neutral zone. So he's been great so far this season.
Yeah, and let us know in the comments what your thoughts are on the pairing. Figure it would be an interesting video to talk about, especially now as they have a very big stretch of games coming up against the Blues tomorrow, and of course the Bruins Saturday, and the undefeated at this point Winnipeg Jets on Monday. So let us know in the comments your thoughts on this. Who have you been impressed with the most this season out of the Toronto Maple Leafs, new acquisitions, or the guys they currently have? We'll see you guys tomorrow.